Hey everyone, it's Duncan Crary. You're listening to the KunstlerCast, a weekly conversation about the tragic comedy of suburban sprawl featuring James Howard Kunstler. Jim is the author of The Long Emergency, The Geography of Nowhere, and The World Made by Hand novels. For today's show, Jim's going to share some of his thoughts on the Occupy movement that is sweeping across America. But first I'm going to ask you to indulge me for a moment while I hawk this new KunstlerCast book that I've produced based on my weekly gams with Jim on this show over the years. A lot of you have asked me if you can support the show financially by making a donation, and that's not something that I've done in the past for various reasons. I've always just told people to buy Jim's books or hire him to give a talk in your town. But now you can support the show and me, the guy who produces it, directly by purchasing a copy of the KunstlerCast book. You can find it at KunstlerCast.com. You can buy it directly from me with PayPal or through my Amazon seller account. It doesn't matter where you get it, whether it's through someone else on Amazon or if you walk into your local brick-and-mortar bookstore and pick up a copy. It all helps. I do want to clarify that this is a book written by me. It's kind of a weird thing to be credited as the author of a book based on a conversation where someone else does most of the talking, but that is what it is. I'm sort of the journalist guy, the gonzo activist journalist guy who put it together. And something else I've never really bothered to clarify, but this podcast is a project that I asked Jim to take part in years ago. He's invested a lot of time and energy to talk to me every week, to do the show, and to give listeners something that they want to hear. But I am the person who's financially responsible for producing the show and maintaining all the equipment and all that. So this book is helping to recoup some of my costs and to allow me to continue doing the show for the time being and keep me in cheese doodles this winter when it gets cold out. Jim does have a new book of his own coming out this summer. It's nonfiction, the first he's written in a while, so put that on your wish list and buy a copy of the KunstlerCast book to whet your appetite while you wait for that. Good thing to bring with you, by the way, if you're heading out to Suburgatory for Thanksgiving. You could even leave a copy there for your suburban uncle or sister, put on their nightstand, tell them, read this, and we'll talk about it later. And lastly, I'll just say it's not actually just a pile of transcripts one after another. What I've done is I've taken the transcripts and I've edited them, I've sort of restructured them, I've put them together to create something that resembles the overall conversation that I've had with Jim. So the topics do flow one to another to form some larger conversation. And of course, I have my own sort of thoughts and musings at the beginning and the end of the book as well. Okay, that is the longest pitch I'm going to give to you on this show. Forgive me. Check out KunstlerCast.com/book for more information. Let's get on with the show. Jim.
Hey, Duncan.
How you doing?
We're back in your cave.
I know, you're a little cold too. Listeners, he's like his jacket on right now.
I know, your apartment is unheated. It's some miserable tenement.
I'm actually pretty comfortable, but I've been eating a lot of cheese doodles lately.
Yeah.
And I have a kind of an extra layer of protection, of blubber.
You've got your own LL Bean blubber vest.
Okay, so Jim, I've been sort of trying to follow the Occupy Wall Street stuff, and a lot of people around here asked me if I wanted to go down and participate, but I had other things going on.
What are they occupying around here?
They're occupying Albany.
Oh, okay.
But these folks were talking about going down to New York City, to Wall Street. Mm-hmm. But anyway, you had written a blog a few weeks ago, I think, that said Occupy Everything, and that seems to be happening now, because I'm hearing from listeners all over the country who are having these Occupy movements.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting phenomenon, and it's both exhilarating and scary, because on the one hand, something is finally breaking the great ice dam of inaction and inertia and paralysis in this country, and especially of ordinary people just sort of taking it up the butt from whether it's from the Wall Street bankers or the Federal Reserve or whoever you care to blame.
Yeah.
So something's happening, but this also could be kind of a revolutionary moment, because the global system is really in what might be described as a state of criticality, and by that I mean there is a kind of a field of science that deals with the stability or lack of it in systems, and how systems go through catastrophic changes, and you get things like forest fires and earthquakes and also political upheavals. And the basic idea is that all of these systems, rather than existing in a state of equilibrium, which is then punctured one way or another, these states are actually states of critical instability at all times, in which almost anything can happen, and it, all it takes is one grain of sand somewhere to shift on a mountainside, and you get an avalanche, or a few flakes of snow, or for a couple of small cracks to slip in a geological fault, and you end up with a giant earthquake. It partly depends on what they call fingers of instability and how long they are and how deep they penetrate a system. And with the political system, I think the faults and the fingers of instability are actually pretty deep. And once a few of the grains of sand start moving, like in the Occupy Wall Street movement, things might really start getting out of hand. At the same time, our whole money system is in pretty bad disarray, but especially the European branch of the money system right now it has really reached a stage of unstable criticality. Just today, while we were recording, the interest rates on Italian sovereign bonds went over the critical 6% range, and what that means is the interest that the Italian government now has to pay on their own bonds that they issue just has no chance of being repaid at that level of interest rates. So they're, in effect, slipping into default, and it's like the third or fourth biggest economy in Europe. So enormous problem. And so at the same time, things are coming apart politically. And the economic and financial crisis is morphing very rapidly into a political crisis, and we're seeing outbreaks of it spread from Wall Street to as far away as Oakland, where the police are shooting army veterans in the head with tear gas canisters and actually injuring people with rubber bullets and tasers and things like that. And I think it's gonna go on indefinitely. It may kind of go into hibernation during the coldest part of the winter, but I'm quite sure it'll reemerge in the spring. And it occurred to me lately, not that it isn't obvious, that we're going to see a lot of disorder around the big political conventions. The Democrats are having their convention this summer, or in the summer of 2012, ostensibly at this point, or presumably to renominate Barack Obama. And so they'll be in Charlotte, and the Republicans are meeting in Tampa. And God knows what kind of mischief is going to go on there. I can only imagine it's going to be a lot worse than the Democratic Convention in 1968, which I went to, by the way. And I was among the crowds on Michigan Avenue who got tear gassed in August of 1968 when they were nominating Hubert Humphrey to run for president. It was all kind of a sad and pathetic campaign. He did win the nomination. And at the time, he was vying with Senator Eugene McCarthy, who had picked up pretty much the mantle of the slain Robert F. Kennedy. And the young people in that moment were tremendously disillusioned and disappointed and angry. The boomers had a very different mood than the millennials of today. And Neil Howe, the author of the Fourth Turning, describes it in an interesting way. He's said that unlike the Vietnam War protesters and the hippies, the millennials actually don't disdain middle-class life per se. In fact, they would be very happy if they could only look forward to having one. But the fact that it seems so completely out of reach, is what makes them upset. Yeah. And that they actually have kind of an idealistic vision of what government could do if it actually buckled down and got serious, whereas the boomer generation, the hippies, were completely disillusioned with the older generation and with government especially, and really with what we call the establishment. So I think the difference is that the millennials just would like to create an establishment that behaves well and does the right things. But I think this movement's going to go on for a while. And the mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, was carrying on a bit about it last week. And he said that it was stupid that the Occupy Wall Street gang were blaming Wall Street for their problems when they should more properly be blaming Washington. But, it should be obvious that what we're seeing and what we've gotten over the last 3 years is really a kind of racket between government and Wall Street to keep on running a deeply corrupt system, and that both ends of it are equally corrupt and disgusting and equally to blame for all of the instabilities that we're going through. So interestingly, I was at a conference in Roanoke, Virginia, and I ran into a guy who was a political operator. He had worked for Howard Dean when Howard Dean was the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. He was one of these real kind of West Wing type slick political pros, a young dude. And I told him I'd heard a rumor that somebody serious was entertaining the idea of starting a third party to get between the Republicans and the Democrats. And I thought maybe it was Howard Dean, because I hadn't seen him on CNBC for several months. I thought maybe he had kind of slipped out, under the radar and back into the woodwork, and was actually doing something to maybe ramp up an alternative selection to Obama.
Yeah.
But this guy said no, it's not Howard Dean as far as he knows. That what the rumor he hears is that Michael Bloomberg wants to run for president on a third party. He is an independent, and that he's gone around hiring all kinds of people who worked for the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2008, and certainly has the money to do it. I'm not that crazy about him, and I'm certainly not endorsing the guy. I'm just pointing out that some people think that he may actually be running. But one thing about Bloomberg is he wouldn't have to take corporate money or banking money to run. He's got plenty of his own. So at least, whether you like the guy or don't like the guy, he might be able to operate independent of taking money from these terrible people.
Yeah. So, Jim, one of the criticisms of this Occupy Wall Street movement is that they don't necessarily seem to have clear demands or objectives with what they're doing.
Yeah, well, one of the theories about that is that they're doing that deliberately because they actually don't want to see their program co-opted and sort of turned inside out against them, especially as the major media and the public relations industry has learned how to do over the last 40 years, ever since the first wave of the first protest movements in the 1960s. Yeah. The people who are in this putative establishment, which still exists, but in a slightly different form than it did in 1968, have learned over the last 40 years how to co-opt and subvert protest movements, and they've gotten very good at using the media to do it. So I think that it's a good idea for the Occupy Wall Street gang to keep their message emergent and just let it form in some sort of a natural way as we head into the election year of 2012, and let it ripen nicely so that by the time they're getting ready to occupy the political conventions, they will have a very clear program or platform or agenda.
You support what they're doing, right?
I don't think they're doing a whole lot except sort of occupying places. But I do support the idea that there ought to be an opposition to our authorities, that our authorities have failed us and our institutions are failing us, and it requires some kind of a political opposition.
Yeah.
So I'm in favor of that. We began talking about this by saying that these political movements can sometimes really get out of hand, and you find yourself in a revolution that's eating its own young. And once you roll out the guillotines and start getting serious about